Welcome back to the channel. Recently on Sketch.com, the writer from that site talked to some comic book retailers about what their biggest issue with comic books is in 2023. Not so much talking about the problems, but the actual answers themselves. And here talking about that is my good friend Doc. How you doing, buddy?
This is an interesting article. I don't know. I mean, it's if there were other answers here, I don't see these being the solutions here.
Well, it just sounds like mostly like the common answer everyone had was, please speak to us. Please engage with dialogue because we would like to hear from you or give you feedback regarding your product, which isn't exactly over like gangbusters this year.
Well, it's not really talk to us. It's tell us what the hell we're supposed to be doing with this stuff. They didn't even ask to be listened to. They just asked to be actually told directly instead of through third party and through the distributors and just have to guess based on the vague solicitations that are out there.
Let's talk about some of the answers here. This is what Bruno Bautista from Big Bang Comics in Dublin, Ireland had to say. One thing I would love to see is an actual dialogue between publishers and retailers. There is such a disconnect between what the publishers are putting out and what customers are asking for. And retailers, as the middle person, are the ones that are on the ground and taking in the reader feedback daily. And more importantly, this is feedback from actual paying customers, not social media. But the fact that one of the biggest comic book shops in all of Europe, Big Bang Comics, says there's an absolute disconnect between me and all the publishers. I know what the readers want. They tell me they don't want what you're making, but you won't even contact me or listen to me when I'm explaining to you what they do want. And thus you get an entire display shelf full of comic books that no one wants to read because Marvel and DC aren't actually listening to the paying customer. As he says, they're listening to social media.
I'm not disagreeing that they need to actually talk to the retailers. I'm just saying that the retailers could get more information to give them than just the people that are left. Because the people that are left...
But if they did that, they wouldn't listen to them. They won't even take their phone calls.
I know. That's the problem. You still need them to at least take the goddamn call with retailers that's a 30-minute presentation on what you have coming out that isn't just this giant convention panel that's nothing but hype that doesn't tell you anything about it. They need to actually talk to retailers more than just at Comics Pro or whatever other vendor convention there is once a year.
You know, when Dan Didio was in charge at DC Comics, and yes, he was in charge, and supposedly it was him and Jim Lee. Jim Lee was over there doing live streams and making comic book covers. He talked to retailers on a daily basis. He was always getting feedback. That does not happen at DC Comics anymore. That pipeline was completely shut off the moment Dan Didio left the door. Over there at Marvel Comics, CB Cebulski is so busy looking at XXX pictures of sushi rolls and what he's going to have for lunch the next day.
Good.
He doesn't really have time to talk to these publishers. And then they end up in a predicament like they are with God's Number One, a $10 comic book that nobody wants to take a chance on. And all of a sudden, CB Cebulski is willing to take phone calls. All of a sudden, CB Cebulski is reaching out to some of these really big comic book shops saying, please buy this comic book, even though I haven't listened to you for 24 months straight.
The fact that you could even try to run a business without contacting the people that are supposedly your customers, not even to ask a question, this store has reduced its ordering by 30% over the past 24 months. I wonder fucking why. That would normally be a bad thing that you would try to seek out some answers to, but apparently they don't even bother to do that.
And that was like the big thing that almost everyone said. This was another thing that you kind of alluded to earlier that I thought was a really interesting feedback. Travis Pratt from Current Comics said, it's hard to name just one thing, but if I had to pick, I'd say, damn, hard to pick between less Who's This For miniseries and less Damage comics in the shipments. Both they're so important, but the damages for us actually have gotten a lot better in the last several months since Penguin Random House changed their boxes again. So I guess the miniseries thing is the best for the industry. But the Who Is This For miniseries, it's absolutely an enormous problem. There are far too many series out there, and there are way too many series that are literally for nobody. We just talked about, Hawk Girl. Who's that actually supposed to be for? We just reviewed, was it Fire and Ice, Welcome to Smallville? Literally a comic book for like two people.
Most of your line at this point is miniseries from both of the big two publishers, all of Image Comics, except for maybe the
Spawn Saga.
Yeah, Spawn. Well, even I wouldn't even necessarily consider Saga an ongoing at this point, since it does like 12 issues at a time and then goes on fucking hiatus for
It went
2
on
years.
hiatus one time after 40 issues.
No, it went on hiatus one other time earlier in the run. But
okay, it's an ongoing series. It's issues like 60.
I will. I mean, look, that's me splitting hairs here. But the idea of miniseries as your sole product line, it doesn't work because look, it's hard to convince a customer to become a customer. It's hard to sell them something the first time. Then you have to hook them with that and keep them coming back. Once you get them hooked and they're going and they're regularly buying it, they stop thinking about purchasing it. I mean, how many of us have actually sat there and looked at our Netflix subscriptions? Probably none of us. I mean, there's very few of us that actually reconsider something that we're already subscribed to. You don't make them reevaluate their purchasing decision. And every time you do a miniseries that's ostensibly taking the place of what should have been an ongoing series, you're making customers reevaluate their purchasing.
Back in the day, like a miniseries, a maxi series was really earmarked and designated for a big time primetime creator that maybe didn't want to do an ongoing, but had a badass story to tell. A lot of times at DC, it would have been an Elseworlds type story. And then you would publish out that story. It would feel like it was prestige because it felt different. And then like nowadays, all the miniseries have the worst writers in the history of the world on them. Just terrible art. Like what's the last miniseries that truly elevated one of these characters that they were actually on? All they really do is devalue the characters because they tell such bad stories. Because for the most part, none of the good creators are on them. They don't feel special. They do feel like an absolute waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, with the last miniseries that actually seemed to have mattered is what? Sean Gordon Murphy's White Knight? That's the only thing that I can think of that is
the White Knight universe.
Yeah, that actually, I mean, it started off as just like a one and done miniseries, or I guess maxi series. It was 8 issues. But when you get New Mutants Lethal Legion after New Mutants ends, or you get a Captain Britain miniseries after Excalibur failed, twice? And then you get, Fire and Ice. Do you think that that's going to actually launch anything? Hawk Girl, is that going to put, the Hawk people back as central, known parts of, or major parts of the DC universe? No. I mean, the publishers are lucky if it's still breaking even by the last issue. It's just filler slop that is designed to eat up shelf space and keep a market share percentage. That's it. That's the only.
Think about all the trees that they're destroying, Doc, with comic books that they know nobody wants to order, buy, or read.
Hey, remember the same people that scream about NFTs and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are the ones supporting having a half a damn forest cut down so they could make their unsellable slop that will rot on a shelf and in another cardboard long box somewhere in the back of some store that they stopped carrying even when the roof started leaking.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Now, this last one that we'll cover here is something that absolutely chaps my ass as a comic book review site. It's bothered me for years. I thought I was the only one. I'm glad to know that I'm not. This is what Steve Anderson from Third Eye Comics said. Much more thought needs to be put into the timing of the releases of books, i.e. avoiding all of your major releases dropping on 1 week or front-loading October due to New York City Comic-Con with all your big drops, and then the opposite, leaving a light week without any bangers at all. Comic book reading and purchasing is all about the repeat visit, and lack of thought being put into the release schedules has put a hurt on that every week visit. I couldn't agree with this more. You want people going in and having a reason to visit their comic book shop every single Tuesday and Wednesday. But there's some weeks there's nothing to talk about because they don't put out one comic book worth recognition. Not a number one issue, nothing as far as like A-list characters or whatever. And it's just an enormous black hole. It's like the third week of the month or the fourth week of the month. And there's nothing there to look at.
This used to only be a 5th week problem whenever there's 5 Wednesdays in a month.
Yeah, it'd be the annual week.
Yeah, they'd schedule their annuals to drop that date because you got 2 of those a year. Look, each of the companies have at least one franchise that is marquee enough to take up 4 weeks in a month. Marvel has ASM, X-Men, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Hulk and Wolverine as your big banger books that are coming out each week. DC has the Superman books, they have Batman books, they have Justice League, they have Wonder Woman, they have Flash, they have Green Lantern or Teen Titans.
You also have Detective Comics and Action Comics.
Yeah.
So you really get to double up on those heroes.
Yeah, exactly. But you could do that where there's 2 or 3 kind of tentpole books each week. That way there's not a reason to skip a week, because that's the message.
You want people when they're done with their comic books to be like, oh my goodness, what did I order for next week? I want to be there early as I can be because these were great and I want to read something next week. Once you get through your books like now, and maybe it's like, well, this wasn't great. Well, was there anything for next week? And you look at it, you're like, oh, no, it's Fire and Ice. Welcome to Smallville's the big release. I guess I'll just take a week off.
Yeah. Once you convince them that there's a reason to stay home and not come into the store, they can make that their new habit instead of coming in and buying shit from you. You're making it very, very hard for these customers to keep up their habit.
Yeah, you would think that the marketing departments, the PR departments at DC and Marvel would have figured out scheduling is important in this part. And you know what else isn't hard, Doc? Picking up the phone, sending an email out to your retail partners, and not making them feel like they're alone as they're trying to sell your direct to people because they don't even know who the comic book is made for. It's absolutely insane that Marvel and DC have basically abandoned these guys. They are the middleman. They're the guy that's sitting at the counter listening to all the complaints about all the dog shit that Marvel and DC are putting out. And there's no way that they can move it up so it can actually be addressed because Marvel and DC just don't care anymore.
Look, at every point, the complaints hit a brick wall with the people they tell them to. The customers hit a brick wall with the retailers. The retailers probably hit a brick wall where it doesn't go any higher if they bitch to the distributors. They don't have any real contacts at the publishers, and the publishers don't have any interest in any sort of dialogue coming back down. They don't want to hear it. They just don't want to hear at this point that they are wrong and that everything that they're doing right now is wrong. And that's what it comes down to. They don't want to listen to what anybody has to say because they can't take any goddamn criticism.
And none of this is new information. We have been seeing this for months now where comic book retailers have basically had enough. They're getting a little bit desperate. They're not able to make a living just selling comic books anymore. They're having to turn to all these new avenues just to raise revenues because DC and Marvel have basically let them down across the board. And they're being really honest about this stuff. I really appreciate it. I think it absolutely sucks for the retailers, but Marvel and DC eventually have to hear these guys. These are their business partners. There's also a link in the video description.